Patrick, it's a pleasure to have you on. I think third time I have you on the podcast, so it's like it's always a pleasure. And like this podcast is an excuse to catch up with friends and people I admire and respect. And I don't know if it's a record. I think you might have the record for the most appearances. And as
Woohoo!
and as I was mentioning, for me this is great because you've made a shift. You're not sick. I want to talk a lot about sick. But before we talk about sick momentum, I want to talk about climate tech. Right? It's kind of the most important topic in the in the world right now. It's like the world is burning. Right? I think everything else, maybe apart, the wars, but obviously it's the key emergency that I think humanity has to focus on. I'd like to poke your brain and learn from you about what's the state of climate tech in Canada today.
Yeah, and it is a burning platform. We've been talking about climate for as long as I can remember, even young. Recycling in the 70s and 80s was like in its infancy, and here we are today. You know, thinking about 2050, 2030, and how we're going to get there, and uh, I have a sense of urgency today that I didn't have like even 10 years ago. So climate tech in Canada is, I'd say, not in its infancy. I'd say is in its second phase of growth development. I'm in talks with several other organizations, startup support organizations across Canada in clean tech. To name one, we're trying to develop a scale up program with Foresight out of BC, and we're still struggling to find scale ups in that space in Canada. You couldn't assemble a group of 50 players that are at the scale up stage in that space. So we still have a lot to do to grow that ecosystem. The good news is that there are some good entrepreneurs in Canada, and there's a lot greater awareness for clean technologies. And what I'm seeing in just the fall cohort that we're launching next week, the average age of the entrepreneurs is above 40 years old, right? So typically these are folks that have more experience, that have identified a problem to solve, have contacted clients, have de-risked their solution. So the businesses that they start are somewhat less risky than a new technology emerging out of pure research, right? That hasn't found a real market. So we're seeing that as a strong trend as well. Um, uh, uh, so new businesses that are created by seasoned entrepreneurs, oftentimes serial entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs, folks that work in large industry that have 15, 20 years of experience, that have identified a problem that they want to solve. And oftentimes these, we can talk about it later, but these entrepreneurs are more in love with the problem they're solving than the actual tech, which is a good thing. I
Yeah,
see your immediate reaction on that, and it's true. I mean, a lot of the PhD folks that we meet are the super technical or scientist type of profiles tend to be in love with their tech, and that's a problem when you're trying to migrate from, well, I have an MVP, I have a technology as an assumption, but I don't know where my market is. That there's a mind shift that needs to be done, and sometimes it's tedious, it's painful for these budding entrepreneurs to make that shift. So I know we're going to talk about it a little later on, but for me, that's the state of the union in Canada. We still have a lot of work to do to accelerate the pace, and grow the funnel. Right? I see the ecosystem as a funnel. We need more entrepreneurs that create companies on the top of the funnel, so that we're going to be generating large businesses a la Inerchem in Quebec that have raised on a $1.2 billion valuation in 2021. So if we want more Enerchems of this world, we need more startups at the top of the funnel that are created So I'm weary of that of growing that funnel, and making sure that we're growing the ecosystem, and it's going in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great snapshot, and maybe a selfish question, and maybe I'm wrong in terms of how I'm thinking about the challenge, because I see it really twofold. I see it on one side, there's technology risk in the sense of like the technology itself that entrepreneurs are building is not yet proven; it's still early, and then on the other side, there's the market risk of whatever you're building. There's no one ready to buy it just yet, right? So, is this the right frame? And if it is, I'd like to hear you as what do you think is the bigger risk today between the two?
So there are sectors that are more risky, that are riskier than others, because they're more regulated. The sales cycles are longer, and to enter these markets, sometimes you need to go through a large established company that has a gridlock on those markets, right? Um, so I tend to see those as having a greater risk potential than a startup that's in a lighter type of technology, a sensor or software even, that is entering a deregulated space, um, because I see less friction in commercialization. We oftentimes talk about technology risk, but we don't we discount. I think in general conversations I'm hearing is we tend to discard the commercial risk, and that's the greater risk as far as I'm concerned than any technology risk that I've seen out there. Um,
It's the buyers,
so
basically, right?
sorry.
It's the buyers essentially.
Yeah, and finding those buyers, finding those potential clients for new tech is tough, and finding that market with a repeatable, viable commercial business model is tough, is very tough in clean tech.
Yeah.
Um,
And what do you see your role, right? Like maybe if we transition to talk about SIG, like is your role to help entrepreneurs kind of like de-risk from the tech perspective or help them understand how do they build something that's very nascent as a market, right? So like be it, let's say on the B2B side, on the buyers or even B2C applications.
yeah, so our role is really, we're there to help entrepreneurs in at the stage of commercialization. So in terms of TRLs, it translates into TRL 6 to 9, right? That's where we operate. So that's typically when a startup has a product and is at the stage of doing a prototype with a client in a production environment, through to 9 where they're actually scaling or commercializing at a larger scale. So that's where we operate, and that's where we help entrepreneurs. And there's a need for that, because that's where oftentimes they fail to validate their market, they fail to pivot on their commercial model so that they find the right segment, or the right buyers, if you want, um, and then they fail to get funding to scale their business and to commercialize in those key markets. So we think that stage, TRL 6 to 9, is absolutely critical, and that's our job, is to help them at that stage. Um, that being said, we're looking at other areas in the value chain, if you want, that have gaps. So I was talking about top of the funnel. So early stage, at the startup creation stage, there's a gap there. We feel, because we're not seeing enough new potential candidates for startups to be created. So we've decided that we will be working on that part of the value chain, which is upstream, right, and to help the ecosystem in any way we can to grow the funnel. And I can talk about that as well a little later on. That's one gap. The other is working on a gap where we think there's in the funding in the funding at the pre-seed stage. There's a gap there as well in terms of number of VCs, number of entities that are would qualify as professional money, if you will, that invest at the pre-seed stage for startups in clean tech. There's a gap there. And the third gap we've identified is downstream after TRL9, which is the scaling up stage, where there are no programs that actually support in clean tech entrepreneurs that want to scale internationally and want to grow their sales, their sales team internationally, that want to grow different markets with their technology, are confronted with freedom to operate for their IP. So those are typical issues that arise when you're scaling up. So those are the three main gaps that we've identified that go beyond the scope of what Cycle Momentum does and operates in, which is stages TRLs 6 to 9. So we're going to start extending the scope of our work to other stages, because that's where we feel there are gaps in the clean tech space.
And maybe for the audience, like if you could explain TRL 6 to 9, what that means.
Yes, I should have. I was assuming that. Never assume. So TRL's technology readiness level, right? So it's the it's a standard that's based on I think it's ICED, the Innovation Canada, that manages that scale from 1 to 9. Typically, incubators manage startups at stages 3 to 6. Accelerators are from 6 to 9, right? That's typically what you'll find.
So yeah, to go back to Cycle Momentum's core mission, you guys are an accelerator. You've been founded from Cycle Capital, right? That invests in these startups. So maybe give us a bit of a sense as to like the scale of Cycle Momentum, where you operate, the types of startups that you're interested in that want to take part in the program.
Yeah, sure. So typically we're looking at, so last year we were at 20 companies accelerated. This year we're looking at 30 companies accelerated in our programs. And we want to grow that to 50. So we have an ambition to scale this, and that's why we're also going to want to focus on working upstream and developing the funnel with at the company creation stage, if you want. If we want more startups in our accelerator programs, there needs to be more startups that are created from the onset. So really, growing to 50, that means that, we're going to be selecting probably out of 300 to 500 candidates per year. That's a lot of volume. Most of these programs are funded by the government of Quebec, Ministère de l'Énergie, Ressources Naturelles. So we have a constraint to scout for businesses locally in Quebec. But our open innovation programs with industry players, we open those up to scouting across the world. And that's what we've done in the past. And that's giving us the ability to bring in the mix companies that come from outside of Quebec, which is great. I think that bringing the outside in our ecosystem is going to be a great motivator to create a much more open, diverse, and dynamic ecosystem locally in Quebec. So if we can grow to 50 per year, that's going to be awesome. That's part of our own objectives. We also want to grow the funds that actually collaborate with Cycle Momentum within our programs. We want to grow that. We call it the circle of partner funds. We're at 25 right now. We want to grow that to 50 partners. So investors that come from Quebec, outside of Quebec, in Canada, and also outside of Canada. Right now we're at 25. We're probably going to be at 30 by year end. and half of these funds are from outside of Quebec. So bringing, fresh money into the ecosystem that is interested in investing in clean tech in the Quebec deal flow, I think is great for our ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah, I agree 100%. And I find it's very self-aware also, where it's not just a deal source for capital. You guys are expanding, thinking about it more broadly, thinking about it from a
Absolutely.
partnership level. And for someone that's really the ignorant like me, it's like my understanding is that, or at least my assessment is, climate tech is almost like a different asset class than traditional VC tech, right? Like SaaS, social media, etc. So how does that, first, is that true? And then second, if it is, how does it then manifest itself in terms of the types of investors, the types of projects that get funded?
Yeah. There are projects. You're right. It's a different asset class depending on the type of technology. If we're talking about hydrogen, graphite, advanced materials, rare earth metals, those kind of products require more capex, right? And have typically longer tech roadmaps. They're a lot more difficult to fund because oftentimes they need to scale up their production line, which requires funding for a plant, and there's it's a bit of how do you say quadrature du cercle?
Um, Framework, if you want, or
No, no, quadrature du cercle is something that's hard to resolve. It's impossible to resolve. It's la quadrature du cercle. What would that? How does that translate in English? Uh, you don't know what I mean? It's
oh, no, you squaring the circle. That's
yeah, somewhat.
yeah.
Quadrature du cercle. Let me just see in DeepL what it's offering here as a translation. Quadrature du cercle. Squaring the circle. That's it. Exactly. Um, because you're talking about companies that are pre-EBIT,
Yeah.
yet they're going for project financing with with plants to build and reactors and heavy equipment of that sort. So it's obviously you're trying to square the circle here in terms of traditional funding models for banks,
Hmm.
right, and VCs. So I think that's one subsector, I'd say, or industries that are more difficult to fund and scale. But if you're looking at other technologies like sensors, hardware that apply to agriculture, industry, robotics, uh, also computing, AI that can reduce GHG emissions, energy consumption. These are all techs that are a lot easier to fund because their go to market is much more straightforward. The technology roadmaps are shorter, and then you get into software, software applications that are layered on these techs. We see some businesses that have software in clean tech as well, and they're also quicker to go to market and to fund. So I'd say if you regroup, if you segment into those three buckets, then you have a better understanding of the different challenges in clean tech. Some of these technologies are harder to fund. Like I said, advanced materials, hydrogen technologies to develop green hydrogen. Uh, to name two examples, are hard to fund, right? Because they're larger scale at the production stage versus software for optimizing energy consumption in buildings, right? So that's the two ends of the scale, if you want, in terms of complexity for the funding models. Um, so yeah, some of these are easier to fund than others.
Yeah, I imagine you have a pretty interesting insider look as to like some of these really cool technologies and startups that are not mainstream yet, that people don't know their name. What do you see your role as CEO of Cycle Momentum, like, because we debated this before. It's like, like, now you're more the coach, but you're like, sometimes you're like, fuck, I want to go on the ice and score that goal myself, but now you have to
Yeah.
take a different role, right? As that as a coach, right? So your role as CEO of Cycle Momentum, how you see it, and then the advantage of working with these startups.
Yeah. So my my role, and it's true. Sometimes because of my entrepreneurial past, I feel like um, I've been on the ice before, like the ex hockey player behind the bench, um, and it's sometimes it's frustrating because I have a feeling that I could do it myself, and it's exactly what not to do as a coach or a mentor. So I have, as CEO of Cycle Momentum, I have a role of being sometimes a coach for some of these entrepreneurs, but I don't spend all of my time with the startups. I would like to, but 30 startups per year, I wouldn't have the time to develop the business, the organization, the ecosystem. So I see my role as chief ecosystem builder,
Hmm.
right? That's really what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to bring in all of these ecosystem stakeholders, investors, institutional investors, VCs, corporate VCs, family offices into the fold. I'm trying to bring serial entrepreneurs that have an interest in clean tech and that want to give back, and coach and mentor these startups, right? So I'm bringing these folks into the ecosystem as well. I'm trying to attract more entrepreneurs that want to create businesses in clean tech. I'm trying to attract government. I'm trying to attract foreign governments, and foreign companies to partner with our own ecosystem. So you see where my job is very macro, versus resolving one issue in one industry with one product. So I've gone from Teo Taxi to developing a electric vehicle service for the taxi business downtown Montreal, um, and trying to resolve that to working at the ecosystem level in Quebec and Montreal. So it's very very different perspective on things. It's fascinating actually because it's I'm going from very finite universe to a very macro level way of thinking and working as well, because I'm working with all of these entities on a daily basis. Unfortunately, the downside of that is I don't have 100% of my time to devote to coaching, spending time with entrepreneurs, which I absolutely love. I never get bored with an entrepreneur, but that's part of the it's part of the role I'm assuming now, and which I love. It's and it's I guess that's the answer to your question, and it's also to the answer to my question, which is why shouldn't I be on the ice right now and trying to score that goal top corner? Well, because I have a large impact with in the job and the role I'm taking on today, because I'm helping 30 and potentially 50 entrepreneurs per year in clean tech, and I'm bringing foreign investments locally here in Quebec in clean tech. So I think I'm doing the right thing in terms of creating impact. I'm 54 years old, and for me it's all about impact today. In my career. So does that answer your question?
I think it's a great answer. And Patrick, I see you have, having gone from playing, like, chess on one board now to playing, multi-dimensional chess on multiple boards, right? Where you have to, like, help grow the accelerator, funding, building the ecosystem. Uh,
Multi-level chess, exactly. Yeah,
Maybe
but it does have that effect on me, and I realize that it's a positive effect. I'm happy with what I'm doing. It's super gratifying. Um, but it's sometimes it swings the other way, and I find myself with the urge of you know going deep into one industry and taking it out of the ballpark. I've one of my dreams is to have impact economically, socially, environmentally, and that's what we wanted to do with Teo Taxi. The original ambition was to scale that business,
Mm.
with a franchise type of model across North America, and eventually in Europe, and eventually IPO. So my dream, if I can't do it myself, I'd love to see that happen in our ecosystem, is to have one massive company out of Montreal that IPOs in clean tech, and that creates thousands of jobs and brings immense wealth and benefit environmentally to our society. That's really my dream. So I've gone way beyond your question.
No, it's all good. That's all good. It's a conversation, not an interview, right? So, going back to why it's great info on why you chose the role, but I find you benefit from existing assets in the sense of this country we live in and this province. What are some natural advantages we have here in Quebec or more broadly in the country that you think startups should come here, right? So be it let's say the funding environment or access to talent from our universities, or just like also on the natural resources front, like Hydro Quebec is like free sustainable energy forever, right? So curious to hear you on those different vectors on in terms of like natural advantages startups
Yeah,
have here.
yeah, and it's funny. I saw something from Montreal International come in recently, um, that is exactly that touches exactly on that. Um, and I found it interesting because they were focusing specifically on clean tech, um, and there are some incredible advantages in Montreal, right? To set up shop in Montreal, there's the obviously the presence of all of these university centers downtown Montreal, um, and even close by. I'm thinking about Université de Sherbrooke, which has a strong research basis that generates startups in clean tech as well. Um, so I think that that alone is a huge advantage, in the quality of living in Montreal as well. And I saw that that's what Montreal International tries to sell abroad, is the quality of living here in Montreal, and the access to talent, government programs, and the quality. I would dare to say the quality of our ecosystem. We're starting to. We were at the Startup Montreal's offsite on Thursday, and you know, um, we're realizing that we made a ton of progress in the last 5 years in the local ecosystem. More investors, more connectivity between organizations that support startups, a deep um, um, understanding of entrepreneurs' needs. And now the ecosystem is moving towards reducing overlaps and creating a better entrepreneurial experience when you're dealing with the ecosystem, you're dealing with the different accelerators, because we all know that there are a lot of them. It's a bit difficult to find your way around. So I would if I sum it up, talent, access to talent, quality of living, a great ecosystem, government funding are some of the major assets that we have to attract entrepreneurs here, European entrepreneurs that are looking for also a launch pad for North America. Montreal is a great place to start off. So yeah, that would be my take on that.
Yeah, you mentioned quality of the ecosystem, right? And I think you're partly to blame for this, right? You were at Bonjour, and so I would say it's hats off for you having spent all these years helping entrepreneurs, being one. Um, So entrepreneurs have this common trait of thinking big, right? So it's like I imagine you're thinking big also for cycle momentum. So any bigger plans, any bigger visions on how where you want to take it? You already hinted a little bit. So maybe I'd like to bring it back. You mentioned like I want to go to 50. I think
Yeah.
we get your funding here. So I want to hear maybe a bit of a broader vision.
Well, when I look at our KPIs for the next 5 years, we're looking at jobs, we're looking at total investment, we're looking at diversity, survival rate, exports, GHG emissions, avoided GHG emissions or reduction if you want. These are all the KPIs that we're looking at and that we're keeping a close eye on. Um, but if I go back to the volume, it all starts with the volume, right? The volume of entrepreneurs that we have. If we're going to be growing to 50 per year and potentially even 60 in 5 years, 65 companies per year that are accelerated, that's a big funnel to manage. And that would take us to 300, close to 300 companies in our alumni that have been, supported by the ecosystem. We're starting to talk about a good critical mass here. So for me, that's the starting point, is getting that critical mass of entrepreneurs involved in the ecosystem, benefiting from the connectedness with other entrepreneurs, making them better, right? And increasing our connectivity with international ecosystems. We're going to Israel at the end of October, and Israel is probably one of the best clean tech ecosystems in the world, right? So we need to connect our entrepreneurs with those ecosystems. Thinking about Stockholm, Amsterdam, Barcelona in clean tech, even LA. Um, so I think those are beyond KPIs. I think those are important factors that we need to keep our eye on. Is connectedness. That's definitely it's hard to measure. But if we go back to our KPIs, GHG emissions, we're looking at an objective of 500,000 tons cumulated. GHG emissions reduced since 2017 to 2027. That's our objective: 500,000 tons from all of the startups that went through our programs. We're looking at 50 million exports per year. That's another objective. If you create exports, you create value locally, automatically, and there's a correlation between Series B, C's, all the alphabet series and exports. The more you export, the bigger company you have. You're beyond your own domestic market. The greater chances you have of connecting with investors that are at those stages, right? There's not only Cycle Capital. Cycle Capital is the biggest one in Canada, but there are others in the US you want to tap into that will co-invest. You want to meet industry players that will co-invest with the Cycle Capital at those stages. You need to export. I don't know any scale up in tech that hasn't exported. So I think that's a very important KPI. Another is funding, total funding accumulated. We're looking at $1 billion as an objective. So we want to have from our 300 plus alumni. We'd like to see $1 billion of investments in those companies through 2027. Right, that's another objective at a very high level. And finally, jobs. We're looking at 2,500. So I'm going through my own KPI, so you have an idea of size, and also that you have an appreciation that we've thought that through as well. I think having ambition is great, but measured ambition is even better.
Yeah. What gets measured gets managed, right? So it's like, yeah, I love the bold ambition, and like, yeah, like I like how you add zeros to everything.
I find that in Quebec we tend to be shy. We tend to shy away from adding zeros to figures, and I think that's a problem. Um, I look at funding for programs in Ontario and the rest of Canada, above 10 million, 50 million sometimes, and I think that's the right scale if we want to have impact in our ecosystem, right? So that's the type of funding that we're going to be seeking for our own programs in the future. So yes, we need to be bold.
Yeah, amazing, Patrick. I could probably, it's a miracle. We've gone 35 minutes. We haven't spoken about riding and bicycles at all. Uh, I would
Yeah,
say,
yeah, because usually we start, it's a half an hour in our conversation. It's about cycling, right?
I just want to thank you, Patrick. Amazing, bold vision. Obviously, I think the planet wants to thank you do for what you guys are doing. So I think it still feels like it's early days. So it's like, yeah, we're going to definitely have to do a round 4 at some point to talk about,
Yeah, yeah.
what those numbers. Final question would be: is if people want to learn more about Cycle Momentum, reach out, connect. What's the best way?
So our website is the best entry point, cyclemomentum.com, and you can write to us directly from the website, or you can write me directly at my address, pgagne@cyclemomentum.com, Pgagne, or find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there as well.
Patrick, merci beaucoup.
Hey, pleasure, man.